Morning, guys. How y'all doing today? We're going to try to get rolling here, and we're going to go finish up look at chapter 15. This is a very controversial chapter. Evolution. It's our big introduction to evolution. It's a whole chapter dedicated to it. And let's take a look at it. Okay, I'm going to share the screen with y'all. So bear with me. We are recording. Make sure I get it all right here. Okay, and you should now see our whales here or whatever. Okay, can you see that okay? Okay, let me move my picture over here where I can see just a little bit here. There we go. All right, now, so this is Darwin and Evolution, chapter 15, which we'll probably spend a little time talking this. We'll probably skip some of these other ones, but we got to move on through. We're going to look a little. I'm going to do this kind of quickly, as I've been doing these kind of quickly. Y'all need to read over these chapters and kind of listen, watch over my video, run through my take on it. But this is a kind of, they're going to do a little bit deeper than I want to go into the early thoughts of what was the setup, evolution of Darwin's work. Then we'll talk about his theory, and then the big question here, and I've got it marked here. List and describe 5 evidence of evolution. Give examples of each and describe your thoughts on the strength of the evidence for each. Okay, so give examples of each and describe your thoughts on the strength of the evidence for each. So the big 5 evidences of evolution, and the one you're going to have trouble finding, I'll go ahead and tell y'all, is embryonic. Okay, I've added that as a 5th. Okay, let's take a look. So first of all, I think the first thing we need to say before we go into this is that I think that in my upbringing, I'm older, man, I'm 55, 56 at Christmas. But in my day, going to church in the South, there was two chapters we never covered in a biology book. They had ripped out the reproductive chapter, so we didn't know how to prevent getting pregnant or childbirth and where children come from. Okay, there's no bird dropping off little children, and we lead the nation in teen pregnancy because we don't teach this stuff in our schools. So that's another subject for next semester. Which I'm sure I'll drive y'all crazy with my thoughts on that. The second chapter that was removed from our books was the chapter on evolution. It wasn't removed; it was glued together, and they had a little label over the front of it, like sealed, like some kind of sealed Old Testament Revelations, kind of reading Revelations. The seals must be broken, and it said, "Thou shalt not read this chapter, or thou shalt burn in hell." The 13th commandment. So saith the Southern preacher. Okay, so anyway. So before we go any farther, let's just make a thought, and let's try to think as scientists and not as. And I am a religious person. I believe in God. I believe that God did all this. But what I think Charles Darwin stumbled upon was the fingerprints of what God did. Okay, that's my belief. Okay, but in science we don't do belief. We do what the data shows. So we're going to look at the data and talk about that as we go. But I would ask you to try to look at this and try to filter through your prejudice already to having heard this from the pulpits of the South, which I think we're doing better now. My preacher now acknowledges that evolution did occur. Okay, and so he's a good friend of mine. So anyway, we can talk about this some other day. But I'm asking you to, and I'll just say this too. Don't take what I say. Don't take what Mater said. Don't take what you see on news. When you have a question about somebody, go and read their original documents. If you got a question about Martin Luther King, you don't think he did good, watch his speech at the march, right? And on Lincoln's monument. If you watch that speech and you have a problem with that, then you got a problem with me, okay? And you got a problem with America. Read Charles Darwin's book. He was English. You can read this. You don't have to have a foreign language. They claim on web it's the most downloaded book. I hope the Bible is, but you may go to darwin.com, whatever, and download it. I actually downloaded it and read it, and I got one that his wife had proofread it, and she made little notes in here like, if you lost your mind, you're going to get thrown out of church and stuff like that. It's really fascinating. I encourage you to read this document, and don't take my word or Major's word for it. Read it yourself, make your own interpretation. Okay, so let's set it up. Here we go. So keep that in mind. That may be the best advice I give you today. That when you have a question about somebody, a character, historical person, or a candidate, then just watch what they say. Watch the videos of Martin Luther King if you have a problem with him. Watch the videos, read Darwin's book, read what he put his name on, okay? So prior to Darwin, the view of nature was determined by deep-seated beliefs held in the intraceable truths rather than experimentation observation. And so for some reason at this time, it was belief was that when God made the world in the first 7 days, that he fixed all the animals as they are and they never change. And that's just the way the biblical Bible scholar, religious people interpret it. So anything against them would be heresy, and we'd light you up on a torch or on a cross, right? You know, and y'all know that, right? The cross was punishment to people, right? Okay, keep that in mind, okay? We know that means something different to us because maybe because Jesus may have died on that cross for us, but to these people, cross is a bad thing, okay? So though if you didn't go along with what the church said, you was in trouble. So biologists have slowly begun to accept various ideas of evolution, which when they just define evolution as species change through time. Actually, a better definition of evolution is change over time in an organism, in a group, in a population. Okay, now Margaret Mader is going to talk about this later about microevolution, and that is small changes in allele frequency, changes in gene frequency over time. That is undeniable, undebatable, 100%. Everybody and every scientist in the world agrees with that one. Macroevolution is saying these small changes over time will lead to a new species. That one is pretty well accepted today, although there are some fringe people that want to argue about that. Okay, but I can see where that could be kind of tough, and I got to think that's pretty wild how that happened. But still, we're here, and God did it somehow, and I think He developed evolution. Okay, or she. Excuse me, don't make the women mad. God could be a she or he. We'll just leave it like that. Okay, but what we can say today, though, is evolution is one of the unifying principles of biology. It explains the unity and diversity of life. Okay. And similarities between living things reflect recent common ancestry. Dissimilarities mean that they are farther apart from their common ancestry. Okay, now this is, we're talking the mid-18th century. Taxonomy matured during this time, and Linnaeus came up with the binary, the two-word naming, genus, species, right? And so there was a big push to name everybody, and he developed the binomial system of nomenclature. And so there was a lot of people trying to name all the organisms out there. Buffon was a French naturalist. Wrote a 44 volume of a catalog of all known plants and animals and provided evidence of descent with modification. He suggested mechanisms that could include environmental influences, migration, geographical isolation, and the struggle for existence. So Darwin didn't come up with this idea on his own. There was a lot of background here. Others here, Cuvier, first to use comparative anatomy, which is one of our evidences of evolution. He founded the science of paleontology, that is the study of fossils and linking the anatomy of these organisms, right? And then catastrophes. He proposed catastrophism, which said local catastrophes in the past caused Earth strata to have a new fixed set of fossils. He said after each catastrophe, the region was repopulated by these pure species from surrounding areas, so there'd be a little bit of time before they changed, okay? And so anyway, kind of interesting. Okay, now Landmark is another one of the most famous ones, and he came up with this concept of, now he did, we'll give him some of the good thing. He did propose evolution. He linked diversity with environmental adaptation, which we know is true. It concluded that more complex organisms are descendants from less common or less complex. That makes sense, right? Did the Model T come first or the 2020 Land Rover? Okay, I think that's the evolution of cars. That's a good example to look at that. And the evolution of the phone. First phone was the size of a suitcase, right? Now you got the little microphones in your earpiece, right? In your glasses. He proposed, though, he was wrong about this next one, this inheritance of acquired characteristics. And we'll look at this on the next page. He said that if you jump really a bunch, your children will jump better. And that's not true. And then Malthus was an economist who studied factors influencing growth and decline of human population. He related famine, war, and epidemics to the problems of population overstretching the limits of resources. And Darwin uses these principles of economics of population to formulate his idea of natural selection. So we give him a lot of credit for the thoughts that Darwin came up with. And then the next guy here said the earth is subject to slow but continuous cycles of erosion. He proposed this uniformitism or whatever, which stated that the rate of change are constant, and we don't think that's exactly true. Here's Landmark talking about the giraffes got long necks because they were stretching up to grab the food at the top, okay? And so therefore, as the giraffes stretch their necks in order to reach food with continuous stretching, most giraffes now have long necks. Darwin would say that original giraffe necks length varied, but competition for resources caused those with long neck by random chance to have more offsprings, and over time, due to natural selection. So natural selection is going to favor the random traits that give you a better chance of survival. Okay, and that's awesome. Okay, and so you can see, so Darwin was right on that one. Okay, so the geological observation consistent with those of Hutton and Leland, which they come up with this theory of biogeography, or not a theory, but that's just a study of the geographical distribution of living organisms on Earth. So it's a study of different areas of the Earth for the organisms there and comparing them to each other. Darwin saw similar species in similar habitats. He reasons that related species could be modified according to the environment. Living forms could be descended from extinct forms known only through the fossil record. But we did have some fossils that showed things that didn't exist today, and that really threw off these people that thought everything was fixed. Okay, so Darwin is going to sign on the SS Beagle to go on a 5-year mission to go around the Earth, and they left Great Britain, and you can see they went to South America, and he saw the birds here, right? Then he goes down to Cape Good Horn, come around South America, and then most of his work was done on these Galapagos Islands and the birds and the iguanas and the tortoises on the Galapagos Islands, which is a set of islands that were connected to South America at one time, but biogeography has spread them out. And as the islands pulled off of South America, then the animals could no longer go back and forth to the mainland animals that he studied here, and they could no longer sometimes fly or swim to each other. So these were a perfect experiment of these organisms on South America being spread out on a chain of islands. And he noticed that these islands had these finches and like I said, the tortoises, and then iguanas. Okay, so, and he studied these a lot. Okay, all right, and we can see that here. So and one of the first ones he noticed was he compared South American animals to those which he was familiar with. Instead of rabbits, he found this little critter in the grasslands of South America that had long legs and ears with the face of a guinea pig. Okay, and here we go. Take a look. So here it is. So he thought of the two. He said, and then he noticed that this Pygonian cavy resembled a rabbit because the two types of animals were adapted to the same type of environment. Both animals ate grass, hid in the bushes, and moved rapidly with long hind legs. Did this thing have the face of a guinea pig because of the common descent with guinea pig, or just random? And take a look. You can see right here. And see how they have a similar rabbit here? This looks like a rabbit face. European hair, and this whatever you want to call it. Okay? But when he got to Galapagos Islands, he saw these tortoises, the finches, and the iguanas, and he observed that the tortoises' neck length varied from island to island based on what they had to eat. If they were eating grass, they had a short neck. If they had eaten other branches, then they had a long neck. Okay? He also proposed that speciation on islands correlated with the difference in vegetation. The finches, which he extensively studied, and they're still being studied today, the ground-dwelling finches have beaks adapted to eating seeds, and tree-dwelling finches had long beaks to reach in and pull insects out. He speculated that they could have descended from a common mainland finch, which has now been proven with DNA fingerprinting. So we've come back now and checked the DNA on these, and he was right about this. And we'll see many pictures of these finches. I will take just a second, though, and tell another story here. When I was in grad school at Ole Miss before I came to work here, or actually I think I was already maybe working here, still working on a degree. One of the professors at Ole Miss was a retired Shell Oil executive. He was a big scientist for them, and he came to America to retire. And one Christmas, we get up around this time of year, he said, "Guys, I'm going to be gone during Christmas, and I'm going on a 2-week cruise to the Galapagos Islands." And come to find out, I think this is probably his religion. And he really, because a lot of scientists have made Darwin's theories in his books their religion, which is not what I think Darwin would have wanted. But anyway, so he went on this, and this is back 30 years ago, and he had a brand new camcorder, one of those big camcorders, and he went down and stayed gone 2 weeks and came back and said, "Y'all got to come over to the house and see my video of the Galapagos Islands." I mean, he just on and on. He said, "Look, I'm going to cook steaks and free drinks." So this is back when we had a little spell. We drank. So I said, "Hey, free drinks and free food." So we all go to his house. And then he proceeds to show 2 hours of iguana videos. And I will testify in court with my hand over the biology book that the iguanas have adapted to the individual island vegetation and what they must eat, because I've seen it with my eyes on the video that a friend of mine shot. And finally, we just had to get up and leave, okay, after we had all the food and drink we could take. But it was a terrible nightmare 2-hour video. I still panic when I see the iguana pictures. I still get like cold sweat every time I see these iguanas in the book, okay? So here's what Darwin said. He said, natural selection and adaptation. Members of the population have heritable variation, which we now know that Mendel proved to be true. More individuals are produced in each generation than this environment can support, and organisms compete for available resources. Some individuals have adaptive characteristics or favorable traits that result in increased survival and reproduction, which cause this organism within the population to differ in their reproductive success. Okay, so natural selection can result in a population adapted to conditions in the local environment as the environment changes. And an increased population of successful generation will have favorable characteristics, or, as we like to say, survival of the fittest. Not because God chose them or man chose them or whatever, it's just they had a trait that gives them a better chance to survive and reproduce, and then those genes become the norm over time. Okay? Variation in the population, we got to have it. He emphasized that individuals from the population vary in functional characteristics, physical, and behavioral characteristics. And he proposed that these variations occur randomly. They can be harmful, helpful, or neutral, and they're essential to the natural selection process. It allows adaptation to the environment over time. So it's not being chosen, but just random luck. Fitness, then, is the relative reproductive success of an individual in a population. So that's a new term for fitness. And adaptation is the change that helps a species become more suited to its environment, and that is the product of natural selection. Now, does selection occur? Well, let's take a look. We have lots of examples of artificial selection. All dogs we now know are descendants from the gray wolf. DNA has proven that. Same DNA fingerprint that allows us to put people to death in this country have proven that you kin to the pine tree. So just deal with it, okay? And gray wolves are the ancestors of the dogs. They began to be domesticated between 1880 and 32,000 years ago. The process of diversity led to extreme phenotypes. The wolves under domestication were separated from other wolves, and each human tribe selected whatever trait appealed to them. And so all of our breeds are dogs. And one of our early definitions of species was that they can only interbreed with each other and have fertile offspring. I would argue that the little Taco Bell terrier cannot breed with the Alaskan Husky. It would kill her. Okay, so I would say we've created new species in our artificial selection of dogs, in my opinion. And I'm a dog fan, okay? But I don't think that was so. So anyway, it's just my take on it. Okay? Now, our selection of plants is well proven, right? We've done this all the times. Check out this one right here. Love this picture. This wild mustard has been bred together and been selectively to produce this Chinese cabbage, Brussels sprouts, and whatever the heck you call that, Corolorava, whatever. I can't even pronounce that one. So we do this all the time. A lot of our plants, there's pictures showing that our corn comes from a weed that the Indians bred together to make mesa, to make corn. And of course, we've perfected it with our artificial breeding now and our genetic manipulation of the corn. So Darwin's natural selection hypothesis was based on observation of tortoises, finches, iguanas on the Galapagos Islands. Here's some of these finches. Notice the large ground finch, the thick beaks to break seeds. This one to reach into the plant, right? Suited to feed on insects, etc. He looked at over 13 different species of Galapagos Island finches, and the beaks all adapted and coloration and beak to the food in that area. Along with somewhat, look at that. The curved beak and the split tongue of the cactus finch is suited to probe a cactus for seeds. Crazy, crazy stuff here. Others have done follow-up work on this and seen this to be true. We also see industrial melanoism in the peppered moth, which they didn't cover here. But the peppered moth is a moth found in England that is a white moth. And the tree bark was white up until the Industrial Revolution around 1900s. Then it got full of soot and turned dark, and they almost died out, except there were a few black pepper moth. And then they came and became the dominant. And then the 70s and 80s, we started cleaning up, making taller smokestacks to blow the smoke over onto Europe out of England. And we cleaned up our area. And then the white pepper moth made a comeback as the black pepper moth came down. So this has been documented with camera and video and pictures. So we cannot argue about natural selection. So we have seen it move in our lifetime in experiments with industrial melanoism, bacterial resistance to antibiotics. We give too many antibiotics. Doctors are passing them out now, and that's caused us to have strands of antibiotic resistance bacteria, right? This is showing how the beak changes due to dry years. Okay, another one there showing that. And that brings us into our big one here on these evidences of evolution. Okay, and this is in your book, starting on page, I guess, yeah, no, it starts on page like 270. Okay, so fossils, and so I always like to play this little game. I like to use the rawometer, and like this is like, that's interesting. I think it tells me something. Okay, proves it. Okay, move on, 100%, I agree. Until like, I'm not sure if the needle moves. All right, the first one that really struck me, and I'm a big believer in fossil record. In my hometown over in Tupelo, Lee County, you can go on our farm and go to the creeks, and you can pull out these big old mussels, big shells that are fossilized in our creeks. Matter of fact, some Mississippi State people came down and we let them collect some of them. They're huge, big as my hands. And Mississippi had never been underwater in written history, but a long time ago that was the ocean floor. Okay, and we know that. So the fossils are the remains and traces of past living organisms, and they tell us a lot about the past. They document a succession of life forms from the simple to more complex. We don't find any humans radio dating back more than 50 to 60, 70,000 years. Okay, so in other words, we don't find a human in a dinosaur. And that brings me to a good question. Did the dinosaurs really exist? Of course they did. Okay? We have fossil record there. I've been to Dinosaur National Park. It's in the middle of nowhere in Utah, northern Utah. You got to go. You walk in there, and park ranger, they got a femur of a dinosaur that's 5 foot tall right at the door. I walk over and start taking pictures, and this park ranger comes over and said, touch it, man. I'm like, dude, I don't get thrown out of here. He said, look, dude, we're in the middle of nowhere. We're Dinosaur National Park. You can touch that femur. So I got a picture of me rubbing a femur of a dinosaur. Now, I got two thoughts on this. Either it's a practical joke, God's up there laughing, or it really happened and we're trying to piece it all together in our mind. And I'm telling you, it really happened because we have found way evidence of those. And we have never found evidence of man with a dinosaur because we came along after they all died, okay? All right, so, and that's what the fossil record is telling us. There are transitional fossils, right? We don't have a complete set of our ancestry, but we're getting close, okay? So that allow us to follow that descent. Here's one that the chapter started off here with this amphibian tetrapod, right? That had arms to crawl over the rocks and stuff. And we know that this one existed 360 million years ago, and then we keep going back, and this is where it descended from, and this is probably where the amphibians came from. And anatomical transitions during the evolution of the whales. I've actually seen this one at the Natural Science Museum in LA, and the fossils of it are hanging up in a room. It's big as the auditorium. I mean, it's 56 foot long whale ancestor, okay? And you can see the vertebrae and how they evolved over time. Okay, so here we go. Here are our evidences. The first one is biogeographical evidence. Okay, this is the study of the plant and animal distributions on the different land masses. Now, I'm not an expert on this one, but I do think it tells us something. So I give that a little bit of interest on my needle. Okay, there are different mixes of plants and animals that would be expected wherever geographical separates continents. The marsupial is a good example in which females have an external body pouch where they young are born complete, where they're young, completely develop in the pouch, and they evolved from egg-laying mammal ancestors. When Australia separated and drifted away from other land masses, the marsupial diversified into many different forms. There's the sugar glider, the wombat, and the now extinct Tasmanian wolf, which is a carnivore that resembles American wolf, and these are marsupials. Of course, kangaroos, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, anatomical. So I do think the fossil record tells us a lot, and so our timelines that we see are based on the fossil record on the radiocarbon dating of when these rocks formed. Anatomical evidence is one I had a class in. I'm not as crazy about it, but I guess it does tell us a lot. Where you look at these similar body bone structures, what we're looking at a while ago, that was the comparison of the anatomy. Okay, homologous structures all contain the same set of organized bones in similar ways. My fifth evidence is evolutionary development. All vertebrates have a post-anal tail, paired pharyngeal pouches that became in our throat to become our thyroid glands and parathyroid glands. Here's two terms that always threw me off. Homologous structures are anatomically similar because they're inherited from a common ancestor. Analogous structures serve the same function but are not genetically linked. And the example would be the flippers on a whale and all that, a tail or whatever, but or all the bird wings. But an analog would be a bird wing and an insect wing, which also flights, but they have no genetic relation to each other, and the bones don't even look the same. Now, another cool term here is vestigial structures. These are structures that they're body parts that we once had and used that we have in our body that we no longer use. There are several species of snakes that have a pectoral girdle, a hind limbs, femur, hips. Our appendix is a good one here. We don't seem to do anything with it, but it seems to be important in other animals for digestion. Okay, so these are structures that we have for no reason. Okay, here are some homologous structures. Look at these wings of the bird, bat, whale, cat, horse, and human lower forelimb all have the same number of bones: humerus, ulnar radius, metacarpals, and phalanges. So that's homologous. Look at this development of embryos. Here's a fish, a salamander, a tortoise, chicken, and a human. At the early embryonic stages over here, you can't tell which is which. We have some chicken embryos in glass, and if I had a human embryo in glass, which I'm not going to buy, you couldn't tell the difference without doing a DNA fingerprinting. So these developmental stages are conservative, and we all seem to share some of the same ones. And obviously, these all develop into turtles and chickens and salamanders and fish, and then the little human there, including our tail and the gill slits that we had. We had gill slits because we probably come from the fish, right? Okay, and then we don't have gills today. And then I think the fourth one here is a big one here. Now we can argue about our and let's review. We can talk about them here. Okay, biogeographical evidence, anatomical evidence, embryonical evidence. But the biochemical evidence is the home run, okay? And this is why. All living organisms use the same 4 DNA molecules, and the genetic code is the same. We use the same 20 amino acids. The only differences are a couple of weird bacterium that some of the archaeobacteria have a little different spelling. And some of the ribosomal RNA seen in messenger RNA, some of the messenger RNA and mitochondrial RNA, is a little bit different. And so the code is the same. And then ATP, look, everybody uses the same ATP. So a couple of interesting here, these homobox or Hox genes, which control body structure, seem to be common in all organisms. Simple changes in gene control have profound effects on phenotype, right? But these are body plans, front, back, left, right. The animal groups have these. And there's hundreds of these, but here is a significance of biochemical differences. This is chromosome C, which is the last chromosome electron transport chain in the mitochondria. As a small protein that plays an important role, it's the last chromosome, cytochrome. And look at that. Us and the monkey have one amino acid difference in that protein. Monkey, pig, us and pigs have a few more, have what, about 10 differences. Duck, turtle, fish, moth, and you and a yeast have 50 differences. And I think it would be fair to say that we are closer to the monkey than we are to the yeast. I think that's pretty cool. So if I could count them, we had our fossil record, right? Biogeographical evidence, anatomical evidence, and biochemical evidence, and then the embryonic development. Okay, so make sure I get my 5 right there: developmental biology or embryonic development. Okay. Now I do like what Mader does at the end. He does talk about some criticisms of evolution. Okay, and this is pretty cool. It's no longer considered a hypothesis, though. Now it's a theory. It's a theory about how life originated. Actually, interestingly enough, evolution has nothing to do with how life formed. Okay, which is a great study of biology itself, is how did we get here? And I would say how the first cell came about is more intriguing to me, is more of a God event, I think, than how we all came from one living organism. I could buy into that one. I believe that happened. But how that first life form came, that's a big question that we've yet to answer. And then they say transitional fossils. Well, actually, we got a lot of them, but obviously some of them are not going to fossilize because they don't have bones. Okay. Evolution proposes that life changed due to random events. Chance is only part of the story. Mutations occur randomly, but natural selection isn't random. Whatever the picked is what's best for that environment. It's not observable or testable. It is not science. Evolution is both observable and testable, and we have evidence of it. I asked y'all. I had a question here on our review sheet to read this nature theme. The Tree of Life, 150 years of support for the theory of evolution. And in his book, it says that he mentioned about, he was the first one to describe all living organisms as a tree root, as a branches of a tree. Okay. And so that is a concept that's been used. And here is a tribute to that, where we are putting all the living organisms on one tree of life here on Earth. And that's pretty cool. But read over this and see what you think about this. And I even had a question here I wrote. I said, what was Darwin's answer to the question, where do species come from and what could he not explain? Who helped him with this problem? Hence, someone we talked about earlier. Why was the idea of life as a tree so controversial during Darwin's time? Is it controversial today? Is it controversial today to say that all life comes from a common ancestor? I don't think it's as controversial as it was 150 years ago. How that first organism came about, I think, is still a God event, how that first thing happened. But I have no problem. I believe there's life in this universe on other planets, too. I think we'll see that in my lifetime, hopefully. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this. This is one of my favorite chapters. I've had so many people get upset. I think I used to start my class by I would go up behind the board, behind a pull down board, and write this word on the board. Then I would ask the class to define evolution. And when I first started 30 years ago, half the class, I said, write down, you define evolution as what you've been told at home, at church, in the community. And they would always, and I would write this on the board. And then before I would ask them out loud, I'd pull it up. And I said, how many of y'all wrote this down? And I would write, we come from monkeys. And that was probably the definition of evolution in Mississippi 30 years ago. Today, instead of half the class writing that down, I get about 10%. So we've made progress. Did we come from the monkeys? No. Did we come from a common shrew-looking, tree-dwelling vertebrate, a little animal out of a tree with the monkeys? Yes. We are probably our descendants with the monkeys, but we didn't come from the monkeys. We come from a common shrew-looking little critter that came out of the tree. And my question to all of our cray-crays out there that go, that can't be, I said, well, you have limited your God, and I'm not limiting my God, because my God can do it any way he or she wants to do it. And this is how it appears that God did it, by the evidence that we see in these 5 areas. All right. Deal with it. I love it. I love it. I think it's fun. We've got to be ready to change. If I had some time, I've actually gone on some trips to see some of this. There was a picture I have over in my box. I had to show it in class where some people thought they had found a dinosaur in a pictograph, an Indian drawing with a man riding a dinosaur. So I walked 4 or 5 miles to see that and come to class, and I'll show you the picture, okay? So I'll give you all a reason to come to class next week. Y'all have a great day. Take care.